people having to pay for their own security. It should not come to that, Adam, in a first world city.
No, and certainly in a state and city like Victoria and Melbourne, where the tax rates are already so high, so people are paying through the nose for public services. And of course, that should include a good police force, but clearly that is not happening in this case. This story is actually a little bit personal for me too, because I just moved to Brighton, and actually some of the locals that I've been talking to there have actually been talking about this crime spree. And at first I didn't believe them, but the facts are now out there. The other thing that I was really surprised about was that this is a state that had absolutely no shortage of policemen during the COVID crisis, when you couldn't even go outside without a mask on. There were thousands and thousands of officers everywhere, it looked like. So I don't think it's a lack of officers. I just think it's a lack of concern, perhaps about certain parts of Melbourne.
Oh, yeah, we had elderly women on park benches being harassed, families at the beach for not being masked. There seemed to be no shortage of police officers back then. Now, I want to play you some video of Peter Garrett. Of course, he disgraced himself with comments about Australia's most successful business person, man or woman, Gina Rinehart. He said to his audience at the Perth Festival, pretend you're dancing on Gina Rinehart's grave. But he wasn't done yet. Let's listen to some of the rant here.
Now, when I see the CEO, the Texan-born CEO of Woodside, start to gaslight the people of Western Australia by suggesting that if you don't support, and if politicians don't support, a carbon bomb on the northwest shelf as the oceans are heating up and Ningaloo Reef's going under and Scott Reef is jeopardised, by saying that, well, in that case, you're going to have more coal, I realised two things. One, these people have no shame whatsoever, and secondly, they're wrong. And they underestimate the spirit and the foresightedness and the faith in the future that people really have, but will have to fight like hell to secure.
Adam, imagine paying good money to go to a concert, hoping to hear some, tracks from the 80s, last time they produced anything worth listening to, and you've got to listen to that diatribe and more.
Well, look, it's probably subsidised by the West Australian taxpayers too, as well, I suspect. And of course, it shouldn't be getting a cent of that. But more broadly, his comments are just absolutely atrocious. I mean, extremely juvenile, extremely unbecoming of a former cabinet minister. I mean, what he said about Gina Rinehart is absolutely awful. She's a great Australian, and she's given back so much of her time and resources to the community. She certainly does not deserve to be spoken about like that. And it's sad. He's obviously seeking relevance. And I think he's just, he's brought shame to that festival. And I think, just as the West Australian Premier said, he's sowing the seeds of hatred and behaving in a highly disrespectful way.
Absolutely hateful, and yet we haven't really heard much from the so-called sisterhood, who see misogyny everywhere. Tony Abbott only needs to look at his watch, and they're up in arms about that. There's a misogynistic, but these appalling comments about Gina Rinehart, Australia's most successful business person. Garrett didn't say anything like that about Twiggy Forrest or all the other mining billionaires who happen to be male. He had that comment about Gina Rinehart, and yet we're not seeing these loud and proud feminists coming out and saying that is just so hateful, it's appalling, wishing death on someone, saying you should dance on their grave, is not what we should be hearing from a former minister, federal minister, and he's 71 too. I mean, by that age, you would hope you'd have some sense.
I know.
Now, let's hear from WA Premier Roger Cook, who made some ill-conceived comments about Donald Trump and his Vice President JD Vance. This is at a pre-election Q&A hosted by the West Australian newspaper.
JD Vance is a
knob. Sorry. You've got to have one unprofessional moment, don't you? That was it.
Does Donald Trump still represent a dark road for the world?
Well, I certainly think he represents an uncertain one. So again, let me just say, at times of uncertainty, you need a steady hand, experienced hand at the wheel.
His comments on Donald Trump were, I guess, a little bit more sensible. Still, I would say, ill-advised. But calling JD Vance a knob, I mean, really?
Yes.
It's so idiotic. He says it was just a light-hearted thing. It was a jibe. It wasn't trying to be insulting. But if he hopes for his state to do any business with America in the next 4 years, I would say that is not something a leader should be saying.
Yeah, no, that's certainly right. I mean, just in general, I don't think state leaders should be talking about foreign leaders or foreign policy in general. So that's the first mistake. And then I think the second one is the word knob. I mean, it's so crass. And, you know, I don't think people could even agree on what it means. So it's just a stupid word. It's embarrassing. And I wince as an Australian when I hear those sort of comments about foreign leaders. And also, I think finally, it's really disrespectful of the very large chunk of Australians who quite like Donald Trump and who quite like JD Vance. And so basically the West Australian Premier is insulting them. So I think that there's this kind of mindset in the political elite in this country that everyone hates Donald Trump and that they can make these sorts of jokes about Trump and Vance. But that is totally not true. And I think that, you know, they will eventually get a rude shock at the ballot box.
And the likes of Roger Cook having a go at JD Vance, I mean, when you put those two men next to each other, their intellect, their achievements, please, you know, it's like having an Auskick kid having a go at an AFL star. It's just a little bit, you know, it's a little bit pathetic. But let's move on to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's done a stunning 180. Just yesterday, we were talking about his comments. He said the end of the Russia-Ukraine war was, and I quote, very, very far away. But today he wants to end the war and sign the minerals deal with the US immediately. He also said, our meeting in Washington did not go the way it was supposed to. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. Adam, that's the understatement of the decade.
Well, look, I mean, I think this goes to show you the power of Donald Trump and the US president in general. I mean, basically, he's had to come back to Washington begging. He's had to apologise, in effect. He's going to sign this deal, although it's not clear, I think, yet whether the US now wants to sign that deal or whether they want to change the deal. Look, I think, you know, the fact that there's a push for peace, I think, is great. That is terrific. But I still think there's so much uncertainty on what the Americans want, what the Russians want, and what the Ukrainians want here, that it's very hard to say where this is going to land. But I do think we all should hope that it does land in a permanent ceasefire.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We all want to see that. We want to see Ukraine get an advantageous deal, but we want the killing and this war to stop. Before you go, Adam, revelations that another one of Chris Bowen's climate dreams has completely crashed and burned. 99% of the planned $100 billion green hydrogen supply has failed to progress beyond the concept stage. This is astonishing. And a further blow, none of the 6 projects shortlisted under the Albanese government's $2 billion green hydrogen plan are now considered viable or bankable. Financial sponsors have walked away. Adam, we've got 61 individual projects being quietly archived. That's a nice word to say they've been dumped. Any way you look at it, this is a disaster, an expensive disaster.
It certainly is. And look, I think sensible scientists and engineers could have said from day one that this was never going to work. And of course, many people did say that. And now we've frittered away billions and billions of dollars on these pipe dreams just to fill up column inches in the newspapers so readers can feel good about themselves, that they're supporting some sort of a renewable form of energy or whatever, or low carbon energy. You know, it's all completely nonsense. And it's just, you know, it's just so sad that we've just wasted so much money as a country on these things when we neglect, you know, the proper and the best sources of power that we have from fossil fuels, etc., and hopefully one day nuclear. And so we've damaged ourselves so much in doing this.
It is. It's all self-inflicted damage, very expensive self-inflicted damage. Adam Creighton, thank you so much for your time tonight.